Hey everybody, MTGers are here with a commander overview for Daretti Scrap Savant. So I like to use MTGO to experiment with decks that I necessarily wouldn't buy in paper, but the pieces are cheap to buy online, and they might be fun to play. So with that being said, I have 3 mono red decks on MTGO. And you might know that mono red is not particularly good in Commander, but Daretti brings the power. So I was deciding, I figured out I wanted to do one of my mono red decks, and I wanted to figure out, which one I wanted to do. So I've got Daretti. I've also got Krenko Goblins, and I've got the new Flipwalker Chandra from Magic Origins. And I was thinking, okay, so Flipwalker Chandra is like burn, and it's not particularly good, but it's fun to play. Krenko is standard Goblins, fun to play, pretty good. But I made Daretti as my first mono red deck I made online. I bought the precon just to mess around with, and this is at its heart a modified precon from the Commander 14 series, and I really enjoy the interactions in this deck. You're not playing a lot of red cards, but the ones you do are they're pretty good. So we're gonna go over the deck, go over the commander, the drill, play some games, and we'll see how this goes. So let's start off with the man himself, Leonardo Daretti. So, Daretti Scrap Savant is a Planeswalker, 4 mana, 3 and a red, 3 loyalty counters. You can +2, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. So let's talk about this ability. This ability is his bread and butter. Being able to pitch large artifacts like a Spine of Ishsaw or a Wormcoil Engine into the graveyard, and then draw cards from that is incredibly powerful. Red oftentimes has a hard time getting card advantage, and so while this isn't necessarily card advantage, we're using our graveyard for artifacts so much that it might as well be. Also, if you have cards you want to keep in your hand but you want to tick towards his ultimate, you do not have to discard 2 cards. Discard up to, which includes 0. You won't draw any cards, but you can still tick his loyalty up without pitching the cards in your hand. So his -2 ability, sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that is his Goblin Welder ability. So basically, if you have artifacts in your graveyard, and if you have a Spine of Ishsaw or a Wormcoil Engine, you can sacrifice an artifact you're not using anymore, like a Ichor Wellspring, and bring back one of these guys. And then, the ability is incredibly powerful. Just being able to weld back anything you've lost or put into the graveyard with your pitch spells, it's pretty scary almost. Not almost, it's pretty scary. And his -10, his ultimate, is you get an emblem with whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of your next end step, rather. So his emblem basically reads, with an artifact deck, they need to exile it for it to go away. So if you can get his emblem and still keep Daretti, so you can just start sacrificing artifacts and then get him back to keep sacrificing them. So his ultimate doesn't say you win the game, but it puts you in one of the better positions you can be to win a game. And he can be your commander, so he will be our commander. So let's go over the deck. Let's start with the lands. Ancient Tomb is standard. We're playing a lot of brown spells, so Ancient Tomb is actually very good in this deck. Not a lot of color restrictions. Arcane Lighthouse. It adds for a colorless, and you can pay 1, tap it, and creatures, until your end of turn, creatures your opponents control lose Hexproof and Shroud and can't have it. So I have a couple removal spells, mostly Chaos Warp, Unstable Obelisk. So in this deck, I can run a lot of lands that tap for colorless because it doesn't matter, and so if you can do that, this is just good insurance. There's no reason really not to run it if you can. Bazaar of Baghdad, very powerful card. Draw 2, then discard 3. In this deck, with a Daretti out, that's basically like drawing almost 5 cards. So you're drawing 2 new cards and putting 3 cards you might want in the graveyard into the graveyard. It's a very powerful card. It doesn't tap for mana, but it's still incredibly powerful. Buried Ruin. You can add 1 to your mana pool or pay 2, sacrifice it, return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So it's just neat recursion. Darksteel Citadel is indestructible. It's an artifact, so you can sacrifice it when you don't need it, and taps for mana. Forgotten Cave is cycling. Great Furnace is another artifact land similar to Darksteel Ingot. Mishra's Workshop, this card is busted. You can tap it to add 3 to your mana pool, but you can only use it to cast artifact spells. So in this deck, it's basically just a repeatable Black Lotus. This card is busted. It's insane. If you have this in your opening hand, it's phenomenal. Like the game, you can't cast Daretti off of it, but you can go turn 1 Workshop into I don't know, Burnished Heart, and go from there. Mountains, I like this Gate Zendikar full art. So we have a bunch of those. Phyrexia's Core, you can sacrifice an artifact to gain a life. You know, sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not. Reliquary Tower, this, again, we have lots of colorless in our mana costs, so having this as just insurance in case we have a lot of cards we don't want to discard is nice. Strip Mine, get rid of problem lands. Temple of the False God, the Poor Man Ancient Tomb. Urza's Factory, you can pay 7 and get a 2/2 colorless assembly worker onto the battlefield. It's just welding fuel for Daretti and helps you grind out those longer games. And Valakut Lightning Bolts, if you have 5 or more other mountains and another one enters the battlefield. So those are the lands. So now we have got our 0 drops. We've actually got a lot of 0 drops. We have Lotus Bloom, which is suspend 3 for 0. And then after 3 turns, you get a Black Lotus, which you can get back with Daretti. It's very powerful. It's one of the only decks, non-combo decks, that I would consider running this in. Everflowing Chalice, when you have a lot of mana, it's a great way to just dump your artifact, or dump your mana into an artifact to get more colorless. And if you need to weld something with Daretti or Goblin Welder, you can pay this for 0 and sacrifice it to get something back. Mana Crypt is a phenomenal card. Also in this deck, you can always get rid of it if your life total is low with Daretti. And Tormod's Crypt is our Grave Hate of choice because it costs 0. 1 drops, Faithless Looting. Draw 2, discard 2 with Flashback. Very good with Daretti, just filtering and drawing. One of the better red cards. Fun fact, this was the first card that I found that was ever spoiled. So I started playing at the tail end of New Phyrexia, right when M12 was coming in, and so my first real set was Innistrad, and so I didn't know really about spoilers until Dark Ascension, and this was the first card spoiled for Dark Ascension, and I love this card. I think it's great for red. It has a really special place in my heart. Gamble, 1 mana Demonic Tutor or 1 mana Entomb. Sometimes in this deck, it's fine either way, but just being able, usually if you cast this turn 1, you're getting a Soul Ring or a Mana Crypt. Maybe even a Mishra's Workshop in this deck. Goblin Welder is a repeatable Daretti -2. This is a kill on sight creature, so if this sticks around for a long time, you win. If it doesn't, you've baited a removal spell. Expedition Map is usually there to get us either Valakut or Mishra's Workshop. Mana Vault, fast mana, sacrifice it when you don't need it. Perfect. Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is really in there for the interactions with Myr Retriever and Junk Diver, both 1/1s that when they die, you get an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So this gives you some value. Also, you can sack the Myr tokens from a Myr Battlesphere. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact creature, you can attach, if Skull Clamp is attached, you draw 2. And then if you just don't have anything and you need to weld something, it's a good weld target. Soul Ring needs no introduction. Voltaic Key, untapping your artifacts. Next up, we have our 2 drops, which are primarily ramp. So we have Cold Steel Heart, naming red. We have Fellwar Stone, which gives us colorless most of the time, but it comes into play on tap, so that's good. Fire Diamond comes into play tap, but adds a red. Ichor Wellspring, when it enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard, draw a card. So this card is very good with Daretti. So it's a 2-mana cantrip, and then it's when you weld it away, it also cantrips, and so you can keep kind of chaining them together. Similar to Ichor Wellspring, you have Mycosynth Wellspring. So when it enters the battlefield or is put into your graveyard, you may search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand. So it's just a good way to keep mountains flowing. It's also a good way to sort of slowly machine gun them with Valakut. Mindstone, one of my favorite mana rocks, and Lightning Greaves for our big dudes. And yeah, so we talked about Mer Retriever. So yeah, Mer Retriever and Junk Diver are basically the same card. One has flying, one does not. But when it dies, either of them die, you may return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can weld a Retriever, get an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, and then also put one from your graveyard into the battlefield with the welding ability. It's a very, very powerful card. Chaos Warp, now that they've changed the rules, you can't use this on commanders. Well, you can, but it doesn't do anything important. But it's just a good way to get rid of the stuff that red can't deal with, like enchantments. Rummaging Goblin, discard a card, draw a card. Looting is good in this kind of deck. Squee, speaking of looting, discarding Squee or killing him with a Skull Clamp is just repeatable engine. You can always get him back. Wheel of Fortune, one of red's best draw spells. Discard your hand, then draw 7. Dualcaster Mage, very neat card. So it is flash. When it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery. You may choose new targets. So it's ramp, it's a counter spell, it's removal. It pretty much does whatever you want. And it's 2/2 for 3. It's a good body. It's not a great replacement for Snapcaster that was supposed to be red, but Dualcaster is a nice compromise. Basalt Monolith, fast mana. If you don't want to untap it, you can sacrifice it. Burnished Heart is a repeatable way to just get more lands. Commander Sphere is Darksteel Ingot without the indestructibility, but you can sacrifice it at instant speed to draw a card for free. Crawl Space is a great one. It prevents you from getting overwhelmed with a bunch of creatures. This deck doesn't run a lot of creatures, and so the ones it does, you need to stick around, and it really helps with not getting just beaten to death. It's also, if they try to get rid of it, you can always just get it back with Daretti. Talked about Junk Diver. Shimmermere as flash. You may cast artifact cards as though they had flash. And Unstable Obelisk adds a colorless, but you can pay 7 to Vindicate, which is very nice. So it's like a miniature spine. Moving on, we have Chandra, another Planeswalker in the deck. So Chandra, this is the only one I consider playing in here. First ability you can almost never use. Third ability you almost never use. She's almost all in there for her Elkin Bottle ability. For 0, exile a top card of your library. You may play it this turn. Just being able to get another source of repeatable card advantage that doesn't cause Chandra to die is good. And usually they'll overvalue Chandra, so it's a good way to take pressure off of yourself or Daretti. Kirkesh, new guy from M15. When you activate the ability of an artifact, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay red and copy it. So he just goes off with all of our different stuff. It's hard to explain all the interactions in here, but we've got like Staff of Nin, Lore Seeker Stone, Trading Post, Tower of Fortunes. Like Kirkesh, he's a good guy. He's a 4/3, so I mean he is still a beater for 4. Gauntlet of Might, very good card. Red creatures get +1/+1, and whenever a mountain is tapped, it adds an extra red. So we're playing all 3 of the mana doublers you can in red and only red. So you get Gauntlet of Might, Gauntlet of Power, and Cage Sun. All of them do basically the same thing. Gauntlet of Might and Gauntlet of Power both do it for your opponent as well, but red is the least played color, so you're not usually running into too many people running it. Nevinyrral's Disc is a good way to reset the board, and you can always just sort of slowly get it back with your guys. Solemn is great welding targets to sacrifice, and it gets a land into play. Thread Dynamo, Mana Acceleration, Tower of Fortunes for the long games. If you can generate a bunch of mana, it'll just keep drawing you cards. Trading Post, this card is a toolbox. You can pay 1, tap, discard a card, gain 4 life. You can pay 1, tap, pay 1 life, put a goat into the battlefield, sacrifice a creature, return target artifact, sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. So it's just this repeatable way to sort of get your grindy engine going. Scrap Mastery, a very cool card. It's living death for artifacts, and in this deck that is insane. Gauntlet of Power we talked about. Gilded Lotus is mana acceleration. Karn is a secondary win condition. You can just make all your non-creature artifact creatures and beat in. Memory Jar is a great way to draw more cards, and if it's in the graveyard you can just use it, keep welding it back to get 7 cards. Mind's Eye is also card advantage, and Mirror Works lets us do insane things. So whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, put a token that's a copy of that artifact onto the battlefield. So imagine having 2 Caged Suns, or Wormcoil Engines, or Spine of Ish Saws. Like, the card's very good. Moving on, we have Horde Smelter Dragon, a card that I have never played with until this pre-con, and it's in here because I like this card. You can use your artifacts to just boost it and fly over and hit their face. Talked about Caged Sun. Dreamstone Hedron is 3 Mind Stones tacked together. Lore Seeker Stone's a neat ability. So you have 6 mana, and you can pay 3 to draw 3, and it costs 1 more to activate for each card in your hand. So if you have 0 cards in hand, you can pay 3 to draw 3, which is phenomenal. Staff of Nin, card advantage, and kills little dudes. Steel Hellkite is also a great way to kill tokens and enchantments and stuff like that. And if you have a bunch of mana, you can just pump them up forever. Wormcoil Engine is just the epitome of artifact crazy monsters. If it dies, it gives you 2 things you can weld it back with. So it gives you 2 artifact creature tokens, which you can sacrifice to Daretti to get Wormcoil Engine back. It's just a value card. All is Dust, very good. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls. So just a way to sort of reset the board. And, well, reset your board for your opponents, and you keep all your cool colorless artifacts. Murmur Battlesphere, the welding target, because it gives you 4 guys that you can sacrifice to get other artifacts, and it's just a huge beater. Spine of Ish Saw, Vindicate, that whenever it goes in the graveyard, you put it back into your hand. So you can Vindicate, sacrifice it to Daretti or Goblin Welder, get it back, do it again. It's very good. Bosch Iron Golem, Trample, you can sacrifice an artifact, deals damage equal to that artifact's converted mana cost to creature or player. So it's a great way to end the game. If you have a bunch of mana, just float a bunch, sacrifice all your artifacts, and go for the head. Ugin, colorless planeswalker that deals with enchantments and creatures. Also, his ultimate in this deck is very good because we run majority permanents. Going on, we have Blasphemous Act, one of our wraths. It's very good because usually we don't have a lot of creatures and we need their creatures to die. Darksteel Forge, artifacts you control have indestructible. Starstorm, deals X damage to each creature, but it also has cycling. And that's why I run this over another, like Comet Storm or something like that. Bonfire of the Damned, you know what this card does. It's great when you miracle it. It's okay when you don't. And it does it to target players, so it doesn't hit your guys. We have run the 2 big Eldrazi. We run Kozilek and Ulamog because we can usually generate that much mana. And if we want to shuffle our graveyard, we can easily pitch them to Daretti or another looting spell and then just go again. So that's the deck. We're going to run it through some games, and we'll see how you guys like it.